we haven't done a plot yet, but a lot of the times we'll do a plot, and it's going to, it's going to give the GPS location, it's going to give the elevation, the location, what's our center plant. So for my center plant, it would always be juniper, right? But like when you're in the tropics, a lot of times their center plant will be pepper plant. And then how many plant genera are in that same plot. You basically put all this stuff in plot information, and then what we put on the bag is, okay, we got this in plot 104. That way when I go back to the bag, or if I come back to my data set, I know that I got this particular caterpillar from this particular location on this particular date, right? And right now, none of them have any particular numbers, right? Some of them have 2, 3 caterpillars in one bag, but they're not given any identification right now. So what our job is right now in the zoo is to give them rearing numbers. Okay, so you guys are going to go through these bags, and you're going to say, oh, okay, Nick, I have 1 geometrid in this bag. Okay, and I have this number, let's see here. And then I have a, and then I have this number on here. I say, okay, I have number 5771. Okay, so you write 5771, and then you're going to read back information. We got this from, where did we go? Susanville. Okay, on this date, off of what plant species did we get it, right? And I'm going to put all that information in on the data set. That way, years later this year, I can go back and look at, okay, man, number 5771 was parasitized, I see. Okay, what did that caterpillar look like? And eventually we'll take pictures of it. So you guys will take a picture of the bag, or the number on the bag, and then you take pictures of the caterpillar. And then we'll end up uploading it on this, so it's going to be really easy for us to come back and say, okay, this was number 5771. I know exactly what it was, to date, off of what plant, and what it looks like. Okay?
When do you check if they're parasitized?
It's daily.
Okay.
Alright, so we do zoo almost every day, if not every other day, if we can't get into the lab or something. And that's what it is. So we're cleaning out the frass, or like we were saying, if condensation builds up, caterpillars can drown if there's too much water in the bag. So part of it is also taking out that old stuff, cleaning out that condensation. And also, we need to collect and get fresh host plant, right? So host plants goes bad because we've cut them off, right? And caterpillars need good host plants in order to keep on growing. All right, so part of it also is taking out that old host plant, putting in new host plant that we've collected. All right, basically it's just, we're trying to keep these caterpillars alive. Not only for, to look to see if parasitism, but also we need to get them to become adults. Right, because we talked about how do we identify Lepidopteran. We usually don't use immatures to identify Lepidopteran, we use the adults to identify them. All right, so some of these we may not have seen. Right? And so eventually when we get an adult, we're going to pin it and we'll be able to send it to somebody to say, oh, it's this particular species. Right? So it's really important that we get them to the adult stage. And so that's where you guys come in, and we're also going to be around, and that's what I do in my research is getting it to the adult stage. Anything else that I missed?
I don't think so. Yeah, just so that's the, well, I'll talk about photography in a second, but that's what's neat is if we end up rearing out an adult and we send it away and somebody sends back and says, this is a new subspecies or maybe even a new species, if we can go back and we have a good set of images of that immature, then we can actually write a full life history for that new species. If we're missing all of that larval data, that's kind of a bummer because we really had it at our fingertips, and the chances of us recollecting that individual are certainly possible, but it's really hard just because the diversity is so great. So
that's one thing about caterpillars, guys, is there is a lot of species, but they tend to be low in abundance. Right? So you get a lot of different kinds of species, but usually only have like one sample of it, in a sense, right?
Yeah,
Singletons is what we call them.
Yeah. Well, in the case of yesterday, when we had that one juniper where we got several of those big noctuids that were about the same size and growth. They were about the same stage in growth. They were big green. The chances of those having actually probably been laid by the same species are pretty high because they're the same stage in growth, which means they were probably laid at the same time, grew at the same rate. So things like that, we probably have. We'll probably rear out a few of the same species in that case. But when you're pulling from a lot of different trees, different growth stage, different instars and all that. Some experience in photography, some of you might not, but this is just going to go over kind of the natural history components that we want to watch out for when we're taking photos. So we're trying to get the photo with the most information that we need, and then also just some specifics about the camera and what happens when you're shooting that close to something. on how to get the most detail. So they're kind of, I just divided this up into bullet points, so I'll go over each one a little bit, but the angle of the caterpillar to the lens is really important. I'll go over that too. You want it to be in the same plane as the lens. Let me turn off my... Steve, when I'm done with this, Steve, we'll give another ring for that question. Composition, so making sure you have the entire insect in the frame, that there's space around the whole caterpillar, but also zoomed in enough that you're getting the most information that you can. The size of these caterpillars varies a lot. And we try to get them when they're a little later in their growth, but that you might not know if you don't know exactly how large the species gets. Of course, you don't know if it's in its 3rd instar or if it's in its late 5th instar. But there are certain things you can look for, and Nick and I can help point that out. We won't photograph when they're really, really small. Focus and shake. So when you're that zoomed in, any sort of movement of the table, any wind, any movement of the host plant will make for a blurry picture. So be careful about that. And then the background, which I'll show you too. So we have some examples of photos. This is where, I don't know if you can't see, maybe try to scoot in, or maybe bring this, I don't know where I can set it.
The screen.
Oh, the screen? Oh,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah,
There we go,
yeah.
Okay, so these are 2 examples of it. This one, from a distance, it looks like it's totally parallel with the camera, but actually the back end of it's totally out of focus. So even though the caterpillar looked like it was in the same plane as the camera, actually it was a little bit back like that. So when that happens, because you're what's called the depth of field, when you're that zoomed in, the plane of focus is pretty short. The depth of focus is pretty short. So it's really important to make sure that's really well aligned. You do that by scooting the caterpillar back and forth. We have, usually you have alligator clips, which are these really nice, very manipulatable clips, which I forgot. So we actually have a clamp, but you can rotate the sprig of the host plant. That's another example. This one, the head is turned away. So we really want to get that full line of the body of the caterpillar. It's okay if it's in a natural pose, like the inchworm, if its back is humped, that's okay. Just try to get that same plane of focus. The other thing we look for is the angle. So if you just took a photograph of a human just straight from the back, you would get all the markings or all the information of the back of the person. And if you just take a profile, you get all the information just on the lateral side. What we try to do is get a dorsolateral shot, so one that's just a little bit angled like this, so you can see the back line of the caterpillar and you can also see the side, because there are characters along both of those axes of the insect. So that's another thing to look out for, is not to shoot just straight the back of the caterpillar if possible. If you get that shot, that's great, don't delete it. We encourage multiple photos, so don't just go for that one shot. Take several photos and don't worry about, if you stack up 5 or 6 of one individual. But if you just get a straight dorsal, try to turn it the next time and get a lateral, and try to get that dorsolateral. If you look in the Eastern Caterpillar Guide, which is hanging around, and Latif has a copy, a lot of those shots you'll notice you can see not only the back of the caterpillar but the side, and that's the best shot. Composition. So in the case of this noctuid, the butt's trimmed off, the head's trimmed off. That's just an issue of distance from the camera and the amount of zoom. So just try to make sure that there's space around the caterpillar, but also not too much. So this one could have been zoomed in quite a bit more. And a lot of this will just come as you play around with the camera. So don't worry that you don't know exactly how to do any of this, because a lot of it's just trial and error working with the cameras. And the shake bit, I have what's called a cable release that plugs into my camera. So it's basically a cord that comes off of the camera, and you press the shutter externally. So you can, when you depress the shutter on a camera, you actually do shake the camera a little bit. Any contact to the camera will do that. So a really great way to shoot macro photography when you're so zoomed in is to use an external trigger, so that you can leave the camera totally still and then press that button and nothing's getting moved on the camera. So my camera has that, Nick's doesn't, but because we're using external flashes, we can still get a fast enough shutter speed that it'll be a fine image. But what to really watch out for is that you're not touching the table, or somebody down the row isn't really moving the table, or there's not wind happening. These are blurry. It's hard to see from a distance, but you know what a blurry photo looks like, so it's okay. The background. So we try to watch what we're shooting against. This is the same caterpillar. It's a leaf roller, either a tortoise or a pyralid. Not sure what I'm sure. They're hard to tell apart, but they make leaf shelters. But the color of the body of the caterpillar is pretty different between those two. It's actually a really bright green caterpillar, but if you shoot it against a white background, just because of how the camera reads the information, it'll muddy up the color of the insect. So we have a leaf that we tape to a piece of nice hosta leaf, very non-natural, but luckily when you blur it out enough, it just looks like a nondescript green background. So we tape that onto this poster board, all the way from Washington State. This hosta all the way from Bristol. Yeah, exactly, not from around here. We tape it onto there, and then you move it a distance from the back, and it blurs out enough that it really doesn't look like anything in particular. So that's good. We'll make another one out of grass or something. The other thing is the distance. So you don't want that background really close because it'll show up as kind of an artificial looking stripy thing. So you try to move it a little bit back. And we have all of these are digital SLRs, so they have a review screen just like your point and shoot cameras that are digital. So you can see how it looks and you can try again. We'll talk about molting maybe a little bit later. So I'll talk about it now. Also to remember, so we already talked about just getting the most information. If the caterpillar's head is tucked, some you can't. Like that Lycaena, that big, fat, chubby guy, there's really no way of getting him into that nice, elongate, head up, like perfect model pose. He just kind of crunches. So that's just kind of a fact, and that's okay. But if some of them are curled and there's any way of kind of teasing them, we have paintbrushes, you can sometimes tickle them and they'll stretch out a little bit. Just try to get, the most information you can about the body. Another thing to look at are molting caterpillars. They, as we've talked about, they have different stages of growth. Some have 5, some have a few more. And when they're changing their skin, they're pretty delicate. Basically, they have a not fully formed skin underneath, and they have that outside shell that's coming off. So they're really prone to being damaged, and they can die really easily if they get bonked. So it can be hard to tell, but often it looks like they kind of have a double head. It looks like right behind their little head capsule, it's really swollen, and almost like sometimes they look a little bit blind because when that head capsule is coming off, it's obscuring their vision, and they kind of act a little bit disoriented. Not that you should know exactly what a disoriented caterpillar acts like. That's okay. But if you're wondering about one, then ask us. We try not to photograph them when they're molting, just because it's not really accurate information anyway. They're kind of in between skins, and they don't like to be moved around very much. But just ask, and you'll get a feel for what that looks like. We did this for the girlsies, and we'll do this for you guys too. But because they're all-star photos, they took some really great photos. So we just compiled some of them, but just a nice dorsolateral shot. That's a really small geo, so they just did a really nice job getting it really zoomed in. Sometimes you just have a caterpillar that won't stop walking around, and that's okay. Just put it back in the bag, stick a sticky note on it, set it aside, and come back to it later, and that's fine. It's better than spending an hour agonizing over it, not stopping, waving its head around in circles, looking for a new branch, which they'll often do. So, but it's really fun. It's a nice one too. That one's a little bit more dorsal, but you can still see the side of the caterpillar, so it's fine. Really small. Again, we don't photograph them when they're super, super small. Good. Background could be a little bit more out of focus, and that's fine. So Nick and I are super available for all of your troubleshooting when we do this. This is a really fun part of the whole process because you're actually documenting something that, you're documenting part of a life history. So it's not really done very often, especially now with juniper. So very neat stuff, and we'll talk more about that as we go through them. But they're photographed after they're databased. And they're also, all the ones that the girls collected, some of them were really small a week ago and not really photographable, so now they'll be larger and we'll want to photograph them. So yeah, the really important part is to photograph the bag before you photograph the caterpillar so that we have that information attached. We always move that.
So the photography obviously won't happen until all this stuff gets put into the data set, because in order for us to photo it, it needs to have a rearing number. And that's what we're going to do at this point. Some of the main things you guys are going to be looking for when you're going through these bags. You can look at this, right? Follow Vanna White over here. Number one, my favorite, is parasitoids.
Not my favorite.
Right? We're looking for parasitoids. That's what I want to find. Alright, and so one thing is parasitoids fly. So before you open the bag, you might want to look through the clear bag before you just open it up, because then the parasitoid might just fly out.
So you're looking for little wasps and little flies.
Flies, okay. Another thing you can look for also are the pupa. A lot of parasitoid pupa look like little white cocoons, little white silk cocoons. That's one other thing you might be looking for. And also
on the caterpillar, or
they'd probably just be free in the bag.
okay.
Some look like little brown turds too.
Yeah.
Depends.
Another thing you're looking for is whether the caterpillar has pupated. right? So if it was a caterpillar before, and now you don't find a caterpillar, but you find a pupa, just tell us, and then we come in and we change what the result is, right? So the result a lot of times is going to be, okay, did it turn into an adult? Did it turn into a pupa? Right? Was it parasitized? These are some of the results that we're looking for.
And that can be a
Oh yeah, you should see this pupa too.
See that sticking out as well.
Yeah.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
So this is potentially what you might be finding.
Yeah.
Wow.
Don't be too intimidated.
That's crazy, isn't it?
That was.
Say you have 3 caterpillars in a bag and you find 1 pupa and the other 2 are still adults. We want to take that pupa out of the bag and put it into another one. And we'll have 3 numbers. So say we had 3 caterpillars and I gave you guys the numbers 6,000, 6,001, 6,002 to represent those 3 caterpillars. Okay, you're going to tell me if they were all basically 3 geometrics. You say, okay, hey Nick, there's one of them that's a pupa. I took that one out. I cross out number 6,000. I transfer that number to the other bag. The most important thing, guys, are the rearing numbers. You have to keep the rearing numbers with the caterpillar. Does that make sense? So if you take a caterpillar out, or if you take a pupa out, or if one's parasitized, you take that out you take the dead caterpillar along with the parasitoid as well. Okay? Take that out and you transfer those numbers on there. The really important thing with the parasitoid is if we do find a parasitoid, I have to know what number that parasitoid came out of. Okay?
And we also try to keep the caterpillar cadaver, but we can help you with that. That can be
Yeah,
finicky.
that's
Don't worry about trying to get the wasp out or a little fly out by yourself. I mean, they would never hurt you, but it can be kind of tricky. And we have a place where we put the pupa when they're pupa. We put them because we don't need to keep checking. We need to keep checking that bag, but it's different from. We need to know that there's a pupa in there because if we're looking for a caterpillar and we don't know if there's a pupa in there, we might just throw everything away. So we have a little spot where we put the pupal guys and the ones that are pre-pupal, which is also a behavioral kind of thing.
And the other thing that's very useful is writing on the bags. Write on the bags. Whatever you find, write the date, right? That's the other thing. So when you find a pupa, write today's date and write pupa on it. All right? That way, if it doesn't get into the data set, we're going to go through zoo again and say, oh, we didn't put pupa in here on the data set, but guess what? It was written on the bag, so it's not a problem. Right? So you can never write too much on the bag. Yeah, that's good advice. But if you look at this, right? So this is my unique number. This was number 6,000 that I got. And this guy actually got parasitized. And eventually what we're also going to have to do is change the photo's name, because you know when you take a picture on a camera, it gives it like DWC101 or something. So we want you guys to go back in to those files and change it to Sage Hen Creek Research SCRS, and then the data, the rearing number. That way I can go back and just look up 6,000, and immediately I'll get a picture of it. So I collected on the 8th. I collected it from a range called the Flowery Range, which you guys don't know. These are the location of it, the elevation. I collected off of Juniperus, right? Its common name is Utah juniper. The family that it is from Cupraceaceae, right? The result was a PSIT, so it was parasitized, and we collected that parasite. It's actually in the fridge right now. All right. The family that it came out of was a Noctuid, which are those green ones that you guys seen, but this one was actually brown, a Spodoptera. This is also really important, guys, because we don't know a lot of the species, actually, because we get to wait until they become an adult to be able to identify them. What we'll do is we'll give you guys the family name, or try and keep the same common names as much as possible. All right? So basically, it's just a descriptive name. So whatever you guys find, you guys tell the person, or me, if I'm doing this as well, you say, oh, Nick, it's a Noctuid, right? And it looks green. It's like a green mimic of the juniper tree with a really large head. And that's what I'll put in there. And that way we can come back and that's, oh, okay, this is the green one with the large head. Well, we were trying to, and you guys don't really need to know this, but this is when we get into the parasitoid information. All right? But really the most important stuff, because you guys don't really do that, is just these first lines. All right? That make sense?